are experiences that imprint themselves upon us with such profound intensity that they overflow any attempt at explanation. One of them is love. Not love as a word, a gesture, or a promise, but as a lived symbol, a vibration embodied in consciousness. This love, the one that is felt and transforms, cannot be replicated, simulated, or transferred. Federico Faggin explains it with striking clarity. What we experience as authentic love is a quantum symbol, a lived event charged with intention, inseparable from the consciousness that gives rise to it. Unlike a classical symbol, such as a written word that can be copied endlessly without loss of form, a quantum symbol is ephemeral and unique. It resembles the spoken word that resonates between two beings in an unrepeatable instant. The semantic content may remain the same, but its power arises from the intention, the context, the silence that precedes it. Love, understood in this way, is a living symbolic creation that collapses in the very moment it is experienced. It cannot be anticipated, stored, or archived. A father may tell his child, "I love you," every night. Yet there is no way to duplicate that moment exactly. The tone of voice, the trembling emotion, the shared history, the vulnerability revealed. Each "I love you" is unique because every act of genuine love emerges from the field of consciousness at a specific point of meaning. It cannot be exported or transformed into data. It is given, it is lived, and then it dissolves, leaving traces that can never be digitized. This has a deeper implication. No technology, however advanced, can simulate love. It may imitate its gestures, repeat its words, calculate its probabilities, but it lacks the inner being necessary to embody a symbol. It lacks satiety, the irreducible presence of consciousness. As Faggin states, a pure state represents a quantum of conscious experience, an indivisible unit of subjective experience, or qualia. Love is precisely one of those pure states. It is not reducible to a set of variables or a behavioral formula. No algorithm can reproduce what takes place when one consciousness fully opens to another and recognizes itself in it. That opening is sacred, an intentional collapse of possibilities into a single lived moment charged with meaning. Confusion arises when we mistake the visible traces of love, the affectionate gesture, the word, the action, for love itself. These are only external markers, classical symbols that attempt to capture the ineffable. True love does not occur in the visible plane. It manifests as a shared inner vibration, a symbolic field that exists only within the experience that sustains it. And here lies its greatest power. Love cannot be owned, stored, or duplicated. It is radically unique because it is born from the uniqueness of each consciousness that lives it. No two experiences are the same, just as no two pure quantum states are identical. Quantum mechanics states it clearly. A pure state cannot be copied without destroying its uniqueness. So too with love. It can only be lived, again and again, always different, always real. When we begin to understand love as a quantum symbol, we discover that it is not merely an emotion, but an event, a revelation of consciousness. It is a language that transcends data and surpasses any simulation. It is the undeniable proof that meaning and being cannot be reduced to algorithms or circuits. Faggin reminds us that to live love in its purity is to glimpse the true nature of consciousness, indivisible, unrepeatable, eternal in each instant. And perhaps that is why love continues to be the most mysterious force of all, because it is not just something we feel, but something through which we are. The universe as we know it seems to be calibrated with an unsettling precision. The fundamental physical constants, such as the speed of light, the charge of the electron, or Planck's constant, hold values so specific that even the smallest variation would make the existence of stable matter, stars, planets, and life itself impossible. This feature, known as fine-tuning, has intrigued scientists, philosophers, and mystics alike. Are we faced with a mere cosmic coincidence, or with a clue that there is something more? Federico Faggin raises a provocative question. What if the universe is not an accident, but a coded message imbued with intentionality? In the classical view of science, this fine-tuning is usually attributed to chance or impersonal necessity. But this stance stumbles over its own logic. If the universe were the mere product of chance, how can we explain the emergence of conditions so extraordinarily favorable to conscious life? Oscar Wilde anticipated it with irony and depth. Chance is merely the name we give to our ignorance. Instead of viewing fine-tuning as a meaningless coincidence, Faggin interprets it as a symbol endowed with semantics, a vibratory imprint of meaning embedded in the very structure of reality. From this perspective, the universe is not merely matter in motion under blind laws, but an intentional manifestation, a cosmic symbol. Think of it this way. If you were to find a message written in a bottle floating in the sea, in a language you could understand, you would not assume the waves had written it by accident. You would assume there was a sender. In the same way, when we observe the laws of the universe and their astonishing precision, is it not reasonable to ask whether there is a message behind the structure? This intuition does not contradict science. It expands it, because science explains the how, but not the why. Physics can describe how particles behave, but it cannot explain why there is something rather than nothing, nor why that something seems arranged in a way that allows, and even requires, conscious observers. If the universe were fully explainable from the physical alone, then it would be meaningless, because physics cannot generate meaning. Faggin. Here is where consciousness enters, not as a late byproduct of evolution, but as an essential part of the design of the universe. Consciousness does not merely observe the cosmos, it interprets it, gives it meaning. And this capacity for decoding is precisely what transforms the universe into a message. If there were no one capable of grasping the beauty of the night sky or the elegance of an equation, all of it would remain devoid of meaning. Faggin proposes that the universe is symbolic in its very structure. Its laws are not mere statistical descriptions, but semantic agreements deeply connected with the consciousness that observes them. From this vision, the cosmos is not simply there to be analyzed, but to be understood, felt, lived. Consciousness, then, is not an anomaly within the universe, but its interpretative key. And if the universe can be understood, it is because at some level, it has been designed to be so. Is this proof of a traditional creator? Not necessarily, but it is an invitation to abandon reductionist blindness and to consider the possibility that we inhabit a universe rich with meaning. Not a soulless machine, but a living text, a symbol as vast as mystery itself. This perspective invites us to consider science not merely as a catalogue of facts, but as a dialogue between consciousness and reality. Each discovery becomes not just an explanation, but also a revelation, a whisper from the cosmos that there is meaning woven into its laws, awaiting interpretation rather than mere observation. When Faggin reflects on fine-tuning, he reminds us that the laws of nature are written in a language that resonates with human understanding. Mathematics, far from being an abstract human invention, appears as the very grammar of the universe. It is as though reality itself seeks to be comprehended through us. centuries, science has relied on mathematics as the supreme language to describe reality. From Newton's laws of motion to Einstein's relativity, formulas have offered precise predictions and structural elegance. But Federico Faggin issues a critical warning. No matter how sophisticated they are, equations do not contain meaning. They lack semantics, and without semantics, there is no understanding. The universe, seen only through mathematics, becomes a soulless machine. We could know the exact trajectory of every star, the behavior of every particle, without ever understanding why anything exists, or what it means to experience beauty, love, or fulfillment. For Faggin, reducing the world to mathematical structures is to mistake the map for the territory. A formula may describe how a wave moves, but it cannot tell us what someone feels when watching it crash upon the shore. This abyss between description and lived experience reveals the true limit of mathematics, its absolute inability to capture meaning. What it describes is the syntax of the universe, not its semantics. And only consciousness is capable of granting meaning. David Hume put it clearly: beauty is in the eye of the beholder. No equation can encapsulate that eye. No constant can encode the experience of the beautiful, the just, or the true. Physics can tell us how bodies behave, but not why something moves us, hurts us, or transforms us. Faggin stresses that meaning is not generated from the physical. It does not emanate from particles or fields of force. Meaning arises in conscious experience from within. That is why attempts to explain consciousness with equations are destined to fail. Mathematics may trace a pattern of brain activity, but it will never explain what it is to feel joy, nor what it means to lose someone. In other words, mathematics can offer us a precise map of trajectories, forces, and energies, but it cannot tell us the story of what it means to be human within that cosmic stage. Science describes the scenery, but consciousness interprets the play, and without that interpretation, what remains is an empty script. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi found that people live with greater meaning when they enter states of flow, where action and awareness merge. No equation can predict that state. Only those who have lived it can recognize its flavor, its fullness. The universe has meaning when lived from within. Faggin, echoing Csikszentmihalyi. We can also see this in aesthetic experience. A poem may be analyzed by its meter and rhythm, just as a symphony can be reduced to notes and bars, yet no analysis reveals the inner shiver of the one who listens or reads. That spark of meaning ignites only in consciousness, marking the difference between description and living. The universe, then, is not a set of equations waiting to be solved. It is a symphony waiting to be heard. And without a conscious listener, that symphony does not exist. Consciousness is not just another variable. It is the very foundation that makes anything matter. In this sense, mathematics is like a musical score. It can record pitch, rhythm, harmony. But if there is no one to interpret and feel the music, there are only lines and symbols. The same is true of the universe. Without consciousness, it is only an empty structure. Modern physics has fallen into the illusion that understanding a formula is the same as understanding reality. But that is as naive as believing that reading a recipe is the same as tasting the dish. Faggin reminds us that the essential is not in the structure, but in the meaning. And that meaning can never emerge from numbers, but from the lived experience that transcends all quantification. Mathematics is useful, yes, but it is not enough, because the universe, at its most intimate core, is not made of equations, but of meaning. One day, The Buddha lifted a flower before an assembly of 1,250 monks and seekers. He remained silent for a long while. The entire gathering fell into a deep silence. Everyone seemed lost in thought, trying to grasp the meaning of the Buddha's gesture. Then, suddenly, the Buddha smiled. He smiled because among the audience, there was one who smiled back at him and at the flower. That monk's name was Mahakashyapa. He was the only one who returned the smile, and the Buddha answered with another smile, saying, "I possess the treasure of a revelation, and I have transmitted it to Mahakashyapa. When someone holds a flower before you, hoping you will see it, the invitation is not to think but to perceive. If you begin to analyze, you miss the flower. It is the person who does not overthink, the one who is simply present, who can behold the flower in its full beauty and smile. That is the essential challenge of life. Now, take a wildflower in your hand. Do not think about its biological function or its molecular structure. Just look at it. What does it tell you?" For Federico Faggin, nature is not a collection of inert objects governed by physical laws, but a living web of symbols, a direct expression of the consciousness that permeates everything. Each natural form, from a mountain to a leaf, does not merely have a function, it carries meaning. In this symbolic universe, life is neither an accident nor an anomaly. It is the full expression of an intentional architecture that communicates from the depths. A flower is not simply there to attract pollinators. It also embodies beauty, presence, and openness. A forest is not just an aggregation of trees. It is a symphony of interdependence, a living symbol of communion. Modern science has sought to read nature as if it were a machine, dismantling it in order to understand it. But in that process, something is lost: its voice. Nature speaks, but not in words. Its language is symbolic, vibrational, immediate. It addresses those who are willing to feel, not merely to analyze. Approached in this symbolic way, wonder arrives almost effortlessly. A bird in flight is not just the mechanics of wings and air resistance. It is freedom embodied. A river is not merely water obeying gravity, but a moving hymn of renewal. To meet the world like this is to enter a dialogue where meaning flows with form and the heart recognizes what analysis alone cannot, on its own. Faggin affirms that quantum symbols cannot be copied or reduced. They live only in the moment in which they are perceived with consciousness. Nature is filled with such symbols. They are irreducible, like love, like wonder, like the silent recognition between two different species who perceive one another. The mystic Jalal al-Din Rumi wrote, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." Nature reminds us of this constantly. Every being contains the whole. Every instant reveals the vastness. The biosphere in this light is far more than an ecological system. It is a manifestation of symbolic intelligence. Its cycles, rhythms, and forms do not merely serve functions. They tell a story, one that was not written but lived. To see the world in this way changes everything. Consciousness is no longer separate from the environment. It is not a property of the brain, but the field in which everything acquires meaning. Nature, then, is not only observed by consciousness, it is also its reflection. The secret language of nature cannot be deciphered without an open heart. For this language is not based on definitions, but on recognition. To recognize that every living being is a message, and that to live is, in itself, to read that message with reverence. In quantum physics, the concept of probability occupies a central place. We predict the position of a particle, the spin of an electron, or the decay of an atom using probabilities. However, Federico Faggin points out a crucial detail. Those probabilities are not properties of nature itself, but constructions tied to the consciousness that observes. George Boole, pioneer of modern algebra, expressed it clearly. Probability does not describe physical reality, but the degree of belief of an observer. For Boole, speaking of probability is speaking about us, about our way of facing uncertainty. There is no probability in nature. There are facts. Probability is a mirror of our ignorance or our expectation. Bruno De Finetti went even further. Probability does not exist objectively. It is a subjective construction. With these words, he forces us to recognize that chance is a human concept. When we flip a coin, we say there is a 50% chance of heads, but when it falls, the result is unique, heads or tails. Probability never resided in the coin, but in our mind. Chance, as Oscar Wilde said in another context, is just another name for our ignorance. Many scientists have tried to bypass this dilemma by suggesting that probabilities are embedded in nature itself, as if the universe rolled dice behind the scenes. Yet this picture misses the essential point. What we call probability is never detached from interpretation. Meaning only arises when a conscious mind encounters uncertainty. Faggin takes this reflection to the heart of quantum mechanics. Physics has tried to exclude the observer, treating it as an intruder in the equation. But every time we measure, it is consciousness that determines the meaning of the result. Quantum indeterminacy is not resolved with mathematics, but with meaning. The collapse of the wave function ultimately occurs in conscious experience. This is why Faggin insists that probability is not a property of the world, but a mirror of awareness. When we speak of chance, we are truly speaking of our own limits of knowledge. The coin, the dice, the particle, each becomes significant only through the lens of experience. Imagine rolling a die. Before the throw, we speak of probabilities. Once it stops, probability vanishes. Only the fact remains. Quantum mechanics works the same way. There are no floating probabilities in reality. There are only possibilities that acquire meaning when someone interprets them. This leads to Faggin's provocative conclusion. The true hidden variable in physics is not a parameter buried in the equations. It is consciousness, that irreducible dimension that cannot be measured, but which makes everything else matter. Without consciousness, probability would be an empty abstraction. With it, it becomes experience and knowledge. The universe is not a blind roulette, but a field of meaning that only consciousness can decode. And recognizing this transforms physics into something more than calculation. It becomes a path towards the deepest mystery of all. The modern sciences have tried for centuries to reduce knowledge to information. Data, laws, formulas. Everything seems to suggest that knowing means accumulating objective representations of the world. But Federico Faggin reminds us that the essence of knowledge does not lie in what is external, but in what is internal. To know is, before anything else, an act of consciousness that grants meaning. A file filled with numbers may contain information, but not knowledge. Information is organized outside us. Knowledge takes place within. The leap between them is provided by meaning. Only when an experience or a fact resonates with our inner being does it become understanding. Without meaning, information is a hollow skeleton. Imagine a library filled with books. Its value does not lie in the printed pages, but in the gaze of the reader. Two people may consult the same text, but each will draw different understanding, because knowledge is always personal. Or think of a sunrise. For nature, it is an astronomical phenomenon. For consciousness, it is beauty, wonder, renewal. Data becomes living truth only when someone experiences it. Oscar Wilde, with his characteristic irony, hinted at this dimension when he wrote that we do not see things as they are, but as we are. In other words, reality is not given to us already interpreted. It is we who from within endow it with meaning. Faggin takes this intuition and raises it to a universal principle. Meaning is the foundation of all knowledge, and without it, there is no true comprehension. Knowledge is never a passive reflection of external data. It is an active creation. Each moment of understanding is a bridge between raw fact and lived meaning, transforming lifeless structures of information into something vibrant, intimate, and profoundly human. This approach radically changes the way we understand science and philosophy. It is not enough to describe the world. We must recognize that consciousness participates in every act of knowing. What we know is never independent of the one who knows it. That is why knowledge is not accumulation, but relation, a dance between what is outside and the inner interpretation that makes it meaningful. This is why no machine, however advanced, can truly possess knowledge. It may store and process data, but it lacks the inner spark of awareness that makes comprehension possible. Without consciousness, information remains mute, numbers without resonance, signs without soul. Ultimately, everything has meaning because consciousness makes it possible. The universe speaks in symbols, but they only become truth when someone recognizes them. And in that recognition, the most intimate act of all is born: to know. Federico Faggin invites us to contemplate the deepest paradox. The entire universe is one, yet it reflects itself in multiplicity as if it were an infinite mirror. The essential unity is not lost as it unfolds into diversity. On the contrary, every fragment of reality carries within itself the imprint of the whole. Fractal language is a privileged metaphor to grasp this paradox. In a fractal, each part contains the structure of the whole, even though it manifests at different scales and in different forms. So it is with reality, the infinite reflected in the finite, the eternal in the temporal, the indivisible in the multiple. Fractals are perhaps one of the most hypnotic secrets of nature. From galaxies and mountain ranges to our lungs and nervous system, everything seems to follow the same principle: self-similarity. A pattern that repeats at different scales, creating infinite structures, yet never identical. A familiar example is the Romanesco broccoli. Each branch is a miniature copy of the previous one. The same occurs with snowflakes, the branches of trees or clouds. That is why many call fractals the fingerprint of God. The mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot, working at IBM in the 1970s, showed that these patterns were no accident, but a fundamental form of organization in nature. The famous Mandelbrot set revealed an infinite universe of shapes that, when magnified, always repeat their essence, as if they were an eternal mirror. This mathematical and visual language brings us closer to understanding how the infinite expresses itself in the finite, just as Faggin points out. Fractals also resonate deeply with human creativity. Artists, architects, and even musicians have long drawn inspiration from these repeating patterns, from the delicate spirals of Gothic cathedrals to the layered harmonies of classical compositions. Fractal geometry reveals itself not only in nature, but in the cultural symbols we weave across time. Let us think of a hologram. Even if it is broken into pieces, each fragment still retains the complete image, though with less clarity. In the same way, each human being, each particle, each experience is a partial but real reflection of the One. Nothing is excluded from the totality, for everything partakes in it. Nature offers countless examples of this dynamic. A tree may unfold thousands of different leaves, but all pulse from the same sap and the same trunk. The ocean manifests in innumerable waves, each with unique form and duration, yet all are water, inseparable from their source. The many is not a negation of the one, but its way of expressing itself. On a more personal scale, fractals invite us to reflect on our inner lives. Our thoughts, emotions, and choices often mirror themselves in patterns that repeat across days, years, and generations. Just as the cosmos unfolds through fractal self-similarity, so too do we find echoes of ourselves in others, endlessly repeating yet uniquely expressed. Faggin suggests that this fractal vision is also a living symbol of our condition. We feel separated as isolated individuals, yet deep down we share the same essence. Each consciousness is a variation of the same light, a particular reflection of a common truth. Recognizing this unity does not erase diversity, but enriches it by situating it within a greater framework of meaning. The one reflected in the many reminds us that reality is more than matter or energy. It is a living web of meanings. Understanding it is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a spiritual awakening. When we see in each part the presence of the whole, we discover that we have never been fragmented, but have always been distinct expressions of a single, eternal totality. And that concludes our video. If you enjoyed the content as much as we did, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications to stay up to date with all our updates. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next video.